Good afternoon, or good evening, or good morning, depending on where you are joining us from. We are so happy to have you today. This is our fourth webinar. For some of you, it will probably be the first, and we are so glad to have you on board on this Navigating Uncertainty webinar series. And I just want to welcome you. First of all, share with you the objectives of this series. And as you can see from your screens, we have four objectives. The first one is we want to affirm your journey. And this will probably have been a difficult time during transition. And we want to affirm that a time of a transition can be difficult, but it can also be a time of opportunity for each one of us. And we hope for everyone joining this webinar that indeed you feel affirmed in your value. But the second thing we want to do is to offer practical grounding. We know to start with, it's been a very uncertain time for you. And so we want to, with this webinar and with this series, support you as you seek to think of a possible new direction for yourself. We want to facilitate visioning and goal setting. We hope that there will be opportunities for fresh new ideas about possibilities that you had not thought of previously. And so we are so very, very grateful to have you on board. As you can see, we've had 3 webinars already. This is the 4th one, and this is about beyond traditional donors. And we trust that through this webinar, we'll be able to reimagine local fundraising beyond traditional donors. We have one more webinar to come, and I'll tell you about that at the end of this webinar. So the webinar objectives for this webinar, as you can see, the title is Beyond Traditional Donors, and 3 really. One of them is we want to explore emerging trends and foster sustainability mindset, and that's a very, very important thing for us to do as we think of going beyond traditional donors. Secondly, we want to learn how we can mobilize traditional or rather domestic resources from other sources that perhaps we had not thought of previously: communities, the private sector, diaspora, and other alternative funding sources that we'd like to think of. And thirdly, we want to offer, and hopefully you will gain tools to repackage and to reposition your organization so that it is relevant and it is financially sustainable in days to come. And so our agenda is fairly straightforward. After these opening remarks, I'll tell you who our presenters are, and then our moderator, and then we'll go right into our conversation. We are so happy to be joined by 3 fantastic presenters and speakers. Some of you may have met them or heard of them. I want to start by mentioning welcoming Evans Okinyi. He is the CEO of East African Philanthropy Network. And we are so very, very happy to have him. He's been a regional champion when it comes to promoting and advancing African-led philanthropy. And you can see some more details on Evans, and we very much look forward to hearing him today. Secondly, let me also welcome and thank Rose Maruru. She is a co-founder, CEO of EPIC Africa. She'll tell us what that stands for when she comes on. lots of experience, 30 years of leadership in this civil society and the philanthropy space across Africa and globally. And so we're very, very glad to have Rose Maruru with us. And thirdly, last but not least, we've got Maurice Omondi. He's the manager of a CPF Group Foundation. He's also the chair of Kenya Association of Fundraising Professionals. So glad to have him here. He's a seasoned development practitioner. He's got expertise in ethical fundraising, resource mobilization, and you'll be very pleased with the help that he will give us, particularly talking about the private sector and how we can partner with the private sector among other sources while thinking about beyond traditional donors. And for our moderator, we are so happy to have a person a number of you would know, Irene Gatheji. She's done many things. Her last tour of duty was as chief of party for USAID Ubora Mashinani program, and we are so happy that she is available to use her experience in guiding us today in this webinar. And so without further ado, Irene, over to you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and I am very excited to be here with you today to moderate this session, and mostly because I'm also part of you. As you've heard, I've been working with USAID Ubora Mashinani, implemented by KCDF, and yes, we've been impacted, and therefore I have learned, and I'm still learning, and looking forward to learning here with you, that you just cannot rely with one donor. I've been in the local philanthropy sector and then quite encouraged and supported many organizations on their journey to diversification. And I am appreciating that there is a lot of change and shifting that has happened, particularly because we have been relying very much on the USA donor, very comfortable. And I appreciate that the change has come, and I'm told it's still going to continue. So this session is for me and for you to appreciate what we can do now that there has been that disruptive change. The rug has been pulled from our feet, and we have to do something. And I am so excited, as you've heard, to have people like Evans, who has been in the sector for a long time. And I've been following a lot of discussions that have been happening since the proverbial January 24th, 2025. And he's been bringing that voice of need for a mind shift. So Evans, we are very excited to have you. I understand from Purity that you'll not be able to stay with us for the whole time. So maybe perhaps you can tell us how long are you going to be with us, so that we know whether we take your Q&A after you speak, or you're going to be part a little bit of, with part of the Q&A as we start. How long can you be with us?
Irene, good.
Yes, so good to see you.
Can we say 30 minutes?
Okay.
I'm so sorry.
Thank you.
In the final stages of our conference coming up, and there's a lot going on.
Thank you.
My team will be here.
Yes, so we are going to take a few questions after you, and then we'll let you go. Very excited to be here. Welcome. We are willing and we are eager to learn. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Irene, and my great colleague, Rose Maruru. Good to see you. Maurice, good to see you. And I'm really looking forward to having all of you in Kigali for our conference. We are having a very interesting conversation. We are having this conversation at unprecedented times. And you look at what happened 50 or so years ago, from the time of the Cold War era to the post-World War II reconstructions, to how aid has been used as a tool for diplomacy, to how, again, it was used as a tool for colonialism and infrastructure development. And what we are seeing now, not just the USAID grant, even what we are seeing with the other bilateral agencies, what we are seeing with the other governments of the global north, what you are seeing now is a shift for most of them saying that if we are to continue engaging with you, then that engagement must make our country safe, specifically for the US. Those engagements must make their country secure. So while on one end, we are losing resources, we are losing aid, which has always come to the global south in form of the grants and all that the USAID and other agencies have given. But on the other hand, we are seeing a strategic opportunity for the business community, and in specific, the private sector. So as we engage in this conversation, I think it's important for us to look at this both, of course, as a challenge and as a disruption, but on the other hand, there are also opportunities that it's creating. I was in a conversation a few minutes ago, and a very interesting thought came into my mind that when private sector, of course, thrives, and the private sector with structured institutions to advance charity, more money comes to philanthropy. So it depends on how we look at all this that is happening. But let me come back to the conversation that we are having today. And just start by saying that the epicenter of disruption, what we saw with the USAID, really signaled many challenges that we've always had in this space. We saw the destabilization of program portfolios, and from the research that we did, a rapid research that we did with development dynamics, over 20% of organizations reported that 75% to 90% of their budgets were at risk, and another 8% faced a complete financial cliff. And what we are witnessing, colleagues, is not a financial disruption. We are observing a crisis of architecture. It is important for us to look into that. We learned that many institutions were structurally dependent on a single donor logic, which was designed for compliance rather than resilience. And when we begin having this conversation, it's important for us to really look into how do we build a resilient ecosystem? How do we build resilient institutions? We've got to be very categorical and very intentional on making use of the crisis that we are having now as an opportunity to reconfigure, as an opportunity to reposition the sector. We saw this 5 years ago with COVID. We are seeing it now. Institutions are collapsing. And the funny thing, or the most unfortunate thing, is that we are reorganizing ourselves to deal with the crisis. We are not looking at the long-term sustainable strategies that we've got to put in place to deal with any shift, any shock that may come our way. And I also want to say that looking at the cascading effects across the ecosystem, we are witnessing three things. We are witnessing fragmentation, we are witnessing friction, and we are looking at fragility. And it is important for us to be clear that what we are seeing now is not an isolated
recording in progress
effect. It is a multi-dimensional unraveling of three things. One, we are seeing staffing systems collapsing, with 40% of organizations reporting layoff, institutional memory and leadership continuity evaporating out of that collapsed staffing system that we are seeing. And you know the risks and the dangers that this gets us into. The second thing is programmatic reach shrinking overnight. From the research that we did, 37.5% of the organizations stopped services. 30% withdrew from entire geographies. And the third thing that we are seeing is mission drift beginning to set in. A lot of organizations are now, shifting away from the core reasons why they were established to fit into available grants and available funding opportunities. And so the strategic plans of many organizations are being rewritten, not because they are wrong, but because the terrain has shifted underfoot. and overnight. But perhaps the most revealing effect is, the psychological damage that this has come up with. And from the research that we did, 42.5% of organizations reported uncertainty around donor priorities. What does this tell us? We have to build institutions that are reactive to donor signals and not grounded in locally determined purpose. And in that fragmentation we are witnessing, there's something more profound, a loss of narrative power. We aren't short of cash, we are short on campus. Now, in terms of the adaptations and the emergence, how the region of East Africa is beginning to rewrite the script, despite of the rupture, despite of the shifts that we are seeing, the East Africa region did not collapse, at least until this moment. Just as during COVID, we are seeing a lot of reconfiguration taking place. The region is beginning to demonstrate what post-donor resilience can look like. And this is taking very many shapes. Among some of what we are seeing is mission-aligned social enterprises, where we are seeing organizations generating unrestricted income from launching impact-aligned revenue streams, from training hubs to consultancy arms to value-added services. These models, colleagues, really preserve the mission and integrity while reducing grant dependency that is leading to the collapse of many systems and institutions that we are seeing. The other thing that I'm seeing the region embracing is around pooled and co-funding platforms. Rather than chasing fragmented grants, we are seeing institutions forming consortia and pooled investment vehicles. And this really enables us to have joint proposal writing, reduced competition, which has been a challenge in this space, to stronger negotiation power with funders, turning competition into real, intentional, collaborative leverage. I think the third thing, Irene and colleagues, that we are seeing in this region is community giving and local philanthropy infrastructure growing. We are seeing the rise of community foundations. We are seeing the rise of giving cycles. We are seeing the rise of faith-linked giving systems. And these are not substitutes, I must say. These are cultural and capital infrastructures that are rooted in place, rooted in trust, and rooted in collective responsibility. Someone mentioned earlier today, again, another thing that we are seeing around diaspora and global citizen investment, where we are seeing the diaspora being recapitalized, not just as a remittance, but as a strategic capital through digital platforms, through cost-based microbonds, through organizations tapping into emotionally aligned global citizens who want to just co-own, the piece of African development that we are seeing at the moment. On the other hand, we are also seeing flexible movement-aligned funding coalitions around emerging funders, specifically feminist ones, climate justice actors. They are moving towards, or rather beyond, traditional grants into responsive, trust-based, non-prescriptive funding to adapt to the emerging needs that we are seeing with communities. It is important for us to ask ourselves, as Irene, as I come to a close, on what is it that is there beyond the donor moment. What must we now build? This moment, colleagues, requires us to demand reconstruction, because resilience, if we are not careful, becomes code for enduring broken systems. But we do not want organizations that bend and bend and bend. We want organizations that can rebuild on new terms. We want truths that we must now hold. And some of those truths from what we are seeing in this region include: our funding models cannot survive a single donor exit. It was never resilient. And so true resiliency that we must see now has to be structural. It has to be diversified. It has to be distributed. It has to be designed for unpredictability. The other thing that we have to put in place is that local capital is not it's not supplementary. It has to be sovereign. So diaspora giving, domestic philanthropy, the mission-aligned enterprises that I mentioned earlier, they are not stopgaps. They have to be strategic futures, and the future that we want to see, that future that will unlock domestic resources, that future that will unlock domestic capital. It has to be a strategic future. The other thing, again, that we are seeing is around the partnerships that we are putting in place must replace patronage. Donor relationships must be reframed, not as charity pipelines, but as value-aligned joint ventures, which are built on mutual risk and built on mutual accountability. Again, lastly, the narrative power is capital. We have to really look at that. Organizations must become more storytellers of their legitimacy. Funding flows where vision is clear, not just where needs are documented. And again, the other thing is that our governance must also evolve. Our boards, our strategies, our leadership pipelines must reflect a future that is beyond aid, one that is fluent in policy, one that is fluent on innovation, and one that is fluent on community voice. Finally, Irene and colleagues, my final provocation to this conversation. If the aids that we have seen, for example, the USAID's retraction was a shock, it was only because we mistook provisions for permanence. The next disruption will not ask for permission. It will simply arrive. So the question is no longer, how do we survive donor volatility? It is, what will it look like if we are to become ungovernable by the donor logistics altogether? Not because we reject global community, no, but because we have to outgrow the dependency paradigm. We must now move from donor-driven survival to ecosystem-anchored sovereignty. That is the work and that is the call that we have to open doors of engagements to. Thank you so much, and over to you, Irene and colleagues.
Joy to listen to you. You've been a leader in the sector for many, many years. You took young EAPN to where it is right now, a formidable organization in the region. We are looking forward to your conference next week. I'll not be there, but I'll follow on that. May we have questions? We really appreciate that you may have a question or two to Evans before he leaves. And in fact, Evans, I was just thinking about this ecosystem. Sorry, I can see there is a question. An appreciation. Luce Kusawa says, thank you, Evan, for opening our eyes. Do you think private capital will fill the gap left by the major donors like USAID? What's your opinion? That's the first one you can be thinking about. Then we have another one. Can you share the study you have referenced to? And I think if your team is here, we'll also follow up with that on that study. But the first one on filling the gaps left by USAID, what's your opinion? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Irene. And thank you so much for that question. I think it is important for us to note that in the ecosystem where we are working, we've got to appreciate the fact that none of us can exist in isolation. The government cannot exist in isolation. The third sector cannot exist in isolation. And of course, the private sector. A prosperous private sector is a prosperous community and society. And the same applies with the government. A prosperous community, prosperous government. There's a critical opportunity that the private sector has at the moment. One is in terms of tapping into the opportunity that foreign aid has always had in terms of bringing resources to the global south. A lot of these governments are now shifting, from aid to trade. So that presents a very strategic opportunity for the private sector, which in turn can then lead the development and sustainable development of the countries that are in question. But on the other hand, there is also the critical role that private sector traditionally has played in the development process. I think if you look at those two angles, then there's a role, and a very strategic and intentional one, that private sector will play in terms of mitigating the gap and the risks that we are currently seeing. I don't want to say that it can fill that gap, but I can say that it has an opportunity to really lead the reconfiguration of the entire architecture and the entire engagement that we have been seeing. Talking about the ecosystem, and Purity, please, you can share with my colleagues a link to the report, and of course for them to be part of the conference, because these are the conversations we'll be having. Day 2 of the conference is looking into that entire architecture around the partnerships and collaboration and engagement between the private sector, government, and of course philanthropy. We have to look at that entire infrastructure and really reposition the ecosystem to enable those engagements to take place, to enable those coherence to be seen and to be intentional in dealing with these challenges that we are having, Irene.
Thank you. Terry Githeji says, and we appreciate her comment, that resilience isn't enduring broken system, but being able to rebuild on new terms. I think that's a very apt comment. Thank you. Gadari Dirango, thank you. You ask, and this will be the last question to Evan so that we can go to other speakers. How do we effectively harness public resources and designate higher proportions for public good? Evans.
Sorry, please come again. I don't know why I'm unable to see the questions. Sorry, public resources, how do we harness?
Effectively harness public resources and designate higher proportions for public good.
Yeah, so two things for me, and I know this is a contentious statement, but where we are at the moment, we've got to be very honest in the conversations that we are having. I think number one, we've got to look into how we can hold our leaders accountable in terms of eradicating. I know eradicating is a contentious word again, but we have to deal with corruption in and misuse of public resources. If we are to harness them, I always say that this continent has enough resources to deal with the challenges that we are having. But we've got to look into issues around transparency, accountability, and hold our leaders to account in terms of using the resources that we have at our disposal in form of public resources. That's number one. But I think number two, we've got to be very intentional around prioritizing our needs. I can tell you, colleagues, fearfully, I sometimes I ask myself how very responsible governments can leave the most sensitive sectors in the hands of private entities, from funding all the way down the line in that value chain. I think we've got to have strategic engagements to just look into where do we put our priorities as a people? Where do we invest on so that we can maximize on the resources that we have as a people and direct them to avenues that will unlock the potential that we have as a people.
Much for answering that. I think what we're going to do is allow you to stay a little bit longer if you wish, and have the other extra questions taken after the other presenters. But we wish to thank you very, very much, Evans, and allow you to drop off whenever you are ready. We appreciate that you have a big conference coming up next week, and also appreciate that you have your team here led by Purity. So if you want to send extra questions to Evans, we can. Asante sana, and we transition now. Thank you so much, Asante. We'll transition to Rose Maruru, and Rose will tell you more about the context and the best practices that are emerging from some of the work they are doing, particularly following the termination of USAID program, and I'm sure she'll tell us more about her organization and her work. Again, we are going to take at least 13 to 15 minutes max to hearing her. Then we are going to then also transition to Maurice so that we can have the Q&A all together. So Terry, I haven't forgotten your question. I'll come back to it. Over to you, Rose. Asante.
Thank you so much, Irene. So I'm Rose Maruru, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of EPIC Africa. And we're often asked what EPIC means. EPIC means enhancing philanthropic impact in Africa, of course. Just a little background as to the motivation behind EPIC. So it's really EPIC was actually really born out of lived experience, working both in global and African civil society and philanthropy, and observing and experiencing firsthand many of the challenges in the sector. If you think of this space as a market, there are many market failures. The key one, of course, for us was the asymmetry of information, but also just the barriers to entry. Like if you're a new CSO, how do you get funding? And the lack of knowledge, services, really no infrastructure to support this sector. When sometimes people ask me what we do, I like to use the analogy or the contrast of our sector and the business sector. And with the business sector, if you want to invest you have money that you want to invest and you're looking for investment opportunities, there's a whole slew of resources that you can refer to, World Bank ease of doing business, their government statistics and projections. I mean, there's a whole knowledge base. There are institutions, from the Chamber of Commerce to association of, you name it, to all these, kind of industry associations, lawyers who specialize just on the business sector. If you want to invest in the social sector, you're on your own, basically. You don't even know, what are the opportunities? Who are the organizations that exist that I can invest in? What do they do? So really filling this gap is what motivated the establishment of EPIC Africa, specifically to try and help to fill one of the key gaps or fundamental gaps, which is knowledge, data and knowledge of, like I said, just who exists, what do they do, where do they do it, with whom, how are they funded, and just really to start to understand this sector. So we set ourselves the impossible task of beginning to map the sector and to develop a robust kind of a hub of data and knowledge. So 2 years ago, we launched the African CSO platform, and if my colleagues are here, I think they can put the link on the chat, with the goal of beginning to have kind of a central hub for data and information for those that are looking to connect or learn about African civil society for whatever purpose. It could be funding, so funders come there. There are also other stakeholders who are interested in the sector, journalists who would like to interview a CSO on a particular issue, but they don't know who should they go to, et cetera, et cetera. The platform also is a space for CSOs to access resources. So we share funding opportunities, training opportunities, conferences, and CSOs themselves can, also share content. So they can also share opportunities. If they have a job they want to advertise, come and advertise there. Because again, if we don't have any specialized sort of outlets like that, CSOs can also write articles, and we have a couple of really active CSOs that constantly are creating and sharing content about their work and other things. So that's on one level. As the second level is, of course, the data that we've been collecting, and we have just shy of 4,000 organizations in our database now from 47 countries. And so we've started to, what can we learn from this data? So it's not data for the sake of it, but it's the insights that data can enable to inform, policy, practice, et cetera, et cetera. And actually, what I'm going to be talking about today or presenting today is one data point that we have been collecting, and it's the question of who are your top sources of funding. So we do these surveys and mappings of civil society organizations. Sometimes we initiate them ourselves. Sometimes we are commissioned by a funder to help them identify potential partners and understand the landscape. And so we asked this one question: who are your top 4 sources of funding? I don't know why we said 4, could be 3 sources of funding. And, we give a selection of everything from, individuals, bilaterals, multilaterals, foundations, local foundations, foreign foundations, etc. And invariably in now, at least at the time of what I'm going to be presenting, we had 4 large surveys. Two of the last ones had over 1,000 respondents from over 40 countries. And invariably, we see that organizations indicate that individuals are among their top 3, in fact, sources of funding. And for a significant number, it's often individuals are the top source of funding, followed usually by INGOs. So they sort of interchange. And when we first saw that data point, we were like, that's interesting, but kind of strange. Are you sure there's no glitch? Because that's not the narrative we have, right? The narrative is that, African CSOs are overwhelmingly, if not entirely, reliant on external funding sources. So already that data point was challenging, to that notion that's how we actually funded. So we decided to unpack, this, 4 surveys to actually begin to see who are these organizations who are saying that they are getting individual funding. What thematic areas do they work in? Are they the big ones? Are they the small ones? What countries are they located in? What's the nature of their work? Are they doing service delivery? What are they doing actually? Is there a sector that seems to attract, more individual funders than another, et cetera, et cetera? So we, to our surprise, we actually found that these organizations that are reporting or that reported individual giving were coming from all sectors, really. Obviously, health, education were leading, but they're also working on issues of women's rights, issues of human rights, climate change, you name it. It's a variety. Now, obviously, 65. Irene, were you going to share the PowerPoint or not?
Do you like us to share, or do you like to share?
Yeah. Why don't you share it? Just maybe like from the second slide. So, second or third. Maybe the first. Go back to the first one. I keep going back. Yeah, still back. Sorry, got a couple more. Okay, next one. Yeah. So next, yes. So why did we choose to focus on this? I mean, obviously, it was an intriguing data point that clearly jumped at us because it was challenging stories that we have been sort of accustomed to about who funds our organizations. And so we wanted to tell this amazing story, which we think is really empowering and which somehow we know, but somehow we don't know. And that's that, we have been in charge of our development for a very long time, right? And so we saw that so there are all these myths, and I won't go through all of them. So there's a myth that individual giving in Africa is insignificant and less impactful than the kind of, aid or giving or grants that we receive from outside, that Africans primarily give informally and primarily to family and friends. That's another very popular myth, that we don't give to development institutions. We might give to the church, to my mosque, or some other religious institutions, but that we don't give to particularly systemic issues. There's another myth that individual giving is localized and reactive in nature, that, we will respond to floods, we will respond to a famine, but we are not funding, so-called, systemic issues. That external funding displaces individual giving. That's another myth, that if you are getting donations from, bilateral funders or formal foundations, that individual will not give to your organization. Actually, we saw that that's not the case. And then there's also this myth about, diaspora giving, which is, seen as one-dimensional, but it's much more complex. And finally, it was a myth around that African CSOs are overwhelmingly reliant on foreign funding. I think I already mentioned that. So, the respondents for this study was 1,027 organizations that responded to this particular study, which was carried out in 2021, which was actually looking at the impact of COVID on African CSOs. And this was one of the questions that we asked about sources of funding. And this came from, 46 countries. But the particular organization that, responded to the question were 838 organizations. And what did they say? So clearly, the individual donations and were 53% of the organizations reported individual donations. So you can see, actually, it is the leading source here, followed by international NGOs, international foundations, community-generated funds, bilateral and multilateral agencies, private sector, local private foundation, and governments. And it's interesting here, if you look at the bilateral, which only 25% of organizations indicated were funding them, which tells us that, yes, there were many African organizations that benefited from USAID funding, but very few of them were getting that money directly, or getting really very significant, funding. What else did we find out? That if you add other forms of individual giving, which would be, like membership fees, community-generated funds, and sometimes the founder, the board, they give, but so for some reason they didn't consider that as an individual giving. But when you add those so-called personal sources as well as community-generated fund, actually the total jumps from 53% of organizations saying that individual giving is among the top, 3 sources of funding, to 65%. So now these individuals contribute, like I said, to a variety of issues. Of course, we see the community development, education, health, but we also see gender, human rights, youth, children, democracy and governance, et cetera, and also that they're supporting a variety of type of activities. So advocacy, and in fact, we see that a big majority, 67%, actually engage in advocacy. Another 32% are engaged in organizing and mobilizing. And in fact, service deliveries, only 30% of the organization who said that they're involved in service delivery. Quite interesting in terms of how, again, myth. Another interesting finding was that as high as 70% of CSOs receiving individual gifts are more than 5 years old. And so what we took away from this is that trust plays a role. So we're not seeing very new organizations getting a lot of individual funding. 50% of these organizations are at that point had under $100,000 budget a year. So again, size didn't seem to matter. Both small organizations as well as big organizations reported significant individual giving. So I know I don't have much time, so maybe I'll skip to, so what did we take away from all of Excuse. Yes. Yes. That's what I'm gonna do. And what I wanted to focus on was, okay, so we present all of this, so what? Okay, so we know that, so what? And for us, the so what is not just, you know, unpacking and challenging the myths, but the so what of what do we do with this knowledge now? And for us, we have, you know, a few recommendations or where we, you know, we think this could lead. And obviously there, you know, there are opportunities. And one of those opportunities to really, we need to understand more this phenomena of individual giving. Who's giving? How much are they giving? When are they giving? And the whole idea behind that is then, as a sector, we can be better prepared or have the tools to actually leverage this generosity that we know exists in Africa. The other thing is, you know, we need to strengthen the philanthropic infrastructure so that it can support individual giving, including, for example, favorable tax and regulatory frameworks where people get a tax break or corporates get a tax break to if they're funding social impact. And of course, continue enthusiastically to reframe narratives around African philanthropy. And the final one, I mean, there are many others, and I will share the report so you can see all the rest of them. But I think, you know, it's really, I think ultimately that I think we have a chance. This US government and other governments funding cuts, I really, you know, sad as they are, and they're affecting real communities, not just organizations, you know, real people, is I think we have an opportunity to leapfrog, right? And really look at how do we even leverage technology to grow individual giving and other types of local giving, and really cultivate a very, you know, African individual giving journey. So for us, we're optimistic. Yeah, it's a difficult moment, but we think the future could be something that we haven't even perhaps begun to imagine, and hopefully we can imagine together. Thank you, Irene. Sorry, I went on too long.
Thank you. And it is amazing that we've been sitting in the gold mine and been wailing and moaning because of the landscape change, because of the funding changes, and yet we are sitting on a gold mine that we are giving more, even more than the funding that is coming from other quarters. Thank you. I want to remind you that we'll take the Q&A after the other speaker, Maurice. So if you have any questions to Rose, please put them on the chat. And I haven't forgotten the question by Terry that was aimed at Evans. We'll definitely be able to tackle that as well. Rose, thank you for sharing the insight on the study that you found that is even more individual giving, and appreciating that our Harambee is right there as part of individual giving. We welcome Maurice Omondi to talk to us about private sector, because we've also appreciated that it's another niche, as you heard from Evans. It's another opportunity for us to tap, for our organizations to tap the private sector in this region. And Maurice has been working in partnership with East African Philanthropy Network, and they have come across some information that we would benefit, particularly on tips on how to work with the private sector. Karibu sana, Maurice.
Thank you very, very much for this opportunity. And I just want to request to put on my slides. So I'm going to share about private sector partnerships. So please just bring the slides on. So as you've heard, my name is Maurice Omondi. I've been in this sector for some time, having worked in several organizations. Sorry, not this one. There's the previous slide, not this one. There's the previous one. Yeah, this one. Yeah. Thank you very much. So I'm going to share with you about CSO sustainability through private sector partnerships. And as I was sharing that, I've been in the philanthropy sector for quite a number of years, and also currently working in the private sector. So I feel competent enough to share with you some tips and ideas of how to engage in the private sector. So moving on to the next slide, please. It's just a basic definition. And just to share, when we talk about private sector engagement or private sector, what are we talking about? And here, I just want to say it's a partnership aimed at addressing the societal issues through joint efforts of CSOs and the businesses. So this is a situation where the private sector come together with the civil society organizations to address the challenges that we are facing. So it involves bringing about expertise, resources, and innovation. So the private sector is coming with a business or commercial perspective, and the CSO sector is coming up with their experience in community impact. So moving on to the next slide, when we talk about why do we have these partnerships, and what you realize that these partnerships are coming with some sort of mutual benefits. You can say that they are can be selfish, but at the end of it, it is a win-win for both sides. And these partnerships are being driven by what you can call compliance as well as push factors. So there are some things which pushes the private sector to support the social impact arm. So moving on to the next slide, where you can see a bit about the compliance factors. So as in many parts of the world and in Kenya and in Africa, there are compliance factors which it can be either the law or regulations which push organizations to put some money to support social impact or environmental impact. So for example, in Kenya, the Nairobi Stock Exchange has put up ESG regulations, environmental, social, and governance regulations, which all organizations who are publicly listed in the Nairobi Stock Exchange are supposed to do. Again, in the laws in Kenya, for example, again, there's the public participation law, which requires the public sector to ensure that they are able to engage with the communities. So it's like a compliance. You cannot just do any investment without engaging with the public. There are also the issue of tax incentives, which come in, and the public sector, the private sector, they want to get tax benefits. So therefore, they have to give some money and they get some tax benefits when they give this money to the private sector. And then there are also international standards for businesses, which include the Global Reporting Initiative, like the Global Compact, and the UN SDGs, which call upon partners or private sector to, comply with the social or environmental impact. And again, in Kenya and many other parts of the world, there is the requirement for environmental impact assessment as well as environmental impact and social assessment, which calls upon organizations to comply. But aside from the compliance factors, moving on to the next slide, is the push factors. So from an organizational point of view, they realize that they are looking for profit. So they're looking at how do they partner with the social, non-profits. How can they partner with them to gain profit? And how can they partner with you or partner with them to increase their brand image, so to be seen to be a good citizen? And also there's the push factor. Sometimes the shareholders, they demand that, we have to give back to the society, the investors, and even employees. They demand that as a company, we must be seen to be complying to environmental standards and also giving back to society. And then there's also the issue of market opportunities, especially for organizations that want to reach out to the underserved segments of society. So they want to reach to the rural areas, they want to give to the low-income areas, and therefore they feel that they must be seen not only to be targeting the top of the pyramid, but even the other people who have got less income. And also the issue of risk and mitigation. So as Ivan said when we started, the issue of COVID and even other environmental factors which have come in. So, it pushes the private sector to engage in this social impact area. So moving on to the next slide, where you can see a beautiful picture of a gentleman greeting a lady. It's just a pictorial presentation of what goes on in the mind of the non-profits. They are looking for community impact, they're looking for goodwill, they're looking for positive reputation, they're looking for brand visibility, they're looking for sustainability. While on the other hand, the private sector, they're looking for profit, they're looking for channels to distribute their products, they're looking for visibility, they're looking for compliance, customer, and even reputation. So I now want to share with you briefly about shared value, which is a concept which was has been raised, and this is something which also drives the private sector when it comes to why they want to you need to understand the philosophy why the private sector will work with you or not work with you. So the concept of shared value is a concept which kind of is a business strategy which aims to create economic value while also addressing societal challenges. So this is a concept which was promoted by some scholars like Michael Porter, moving on to the next slide, and Mark Kramer, which is basically talking about how do we work as a community towards a common good. So on one hand, we are promoting the economy, we are also promoting society, and also promoting the environment. How do these three corners, and Professor Yunus Mohammed has also talked about the 3 zeros. So they're all issues about shared value, cuts across how do you combine business opportunities, societal needs, and the company's asset and expertise. So at the middle is a shared value. So it's basically thinking about profit, people, and environment. Is thinking about your business opportunity, social needs, and even making use of the company assets. So this is also another thing which really promotes private organizations to support the private sector. So moving on to the next slide, I want to share with you some frameworks for CSO and private sector engagement. And I already mentioned a few, but even from the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, goal number 17 in particular talks about partnerships for the goals. So this is a compelling factor for the private sector to go and work with the non-profits. Then there is also the environmental, social, and governance frameworks, which are becoming more and more keen, as well as the public-private partnerships. And as Evans has also spoken before, actually public-private partnerships and even philanthropy, so the 4 Ps. But I just want to talk about the public-private partnerships, where the government invites the private sector and even the public sector to invest in social projects, and even some of them have got commercial angles, some of them have got environmental angles. But these are some of the frameworks that are available for CSO and private sector engagement. Now, I would like to move now to some practical steps of, like if you really want to start the partnership between the private sector and a non-governmental organization, what are some of the things that you need to do? So going on to the next slide about the key steps for successful cooperation, I just want to mention a few, and I also want to welcome people in the room. You have more experiences, you can chat in the box, you can share like what have you done before, what has worked for you. But what I'm sharing here is just a few tips. And one thing which is very, very critical for all of us is you need to know yourself. You need to know your needs. You need to know yourself as an organization. What are your strengths, weaknesses, as well as opportunities and even threats? What is your reputation? You need to look at, have you partnered with the private sector or businesses before? Do you need to rebrand? So as Evans was saying, due to the large drop of income from the US, and which is, when the US coughs, other organizations follow. Do you need to rebrand? And then do you need to, for example, pursue certification that can make us to be visible and to have a good reputation? And when you're talking of certification, there are many organizations that do certification. In Kenya, we used to have the Viwango, although it has been a little bit dormant, but it was a very, very big move towards certification. We have the PBO authority, which gives certification for registration of NGOs. And in many parts of the continent, there are many organizations that does certification. We have Civicas, which can also give certification. We have global organizations like Global Charity Navigator. So, if you have any of these certifications which show that you are an ethical organization, it really gives you a lot of advantage. There's GuideStar, there is Candid USA, and many others. There is, of course, even employing staff. Do you show that they have got qualifications like if they are an accountant, you have got qualifications like a CPA or certified public accountants, or do you put your audited reports to be seen and they are audited according to international standards? Do you have qualified staff doing fundraising? And there are some certifications for fundraisers globally, like CFRE, International Certified Fundraising Executive. So these certifications are very, very crucial. So moving on quickly because of time, also I want to share briefly about some types of corporate partnerships. And these include cost marketing, which is a collaboration between non-profits and profit, to mutually raise their brands around some particular causes. There is the corporate sponsorships, there is voluntarism, there is in-kind giving, there is pro bono services, there is a matching donation where an organization says that if you're able to raise these funds of money from your communities, we match this. Then there is even co-branding opportunities and many more. So these are just examples, and you'll be able to get slides to to understand deeper. Then I'll just speak briefly about some of these models which I've just shared in the previous slide, like models for private sector CSO collaboration. There is the sponsorships and the financial support that private sector can give. There is the public-private partnerships, which I already mentioned. You can also gain skills and expertise from the private sector. Instead of just asking for money, you can ask for donation in terms of time. Somebody can do for you your books of accounts, financial training. Somebody can do for you auditing, and you count that as giving in kind. So instead of paying money to bring on an auditor, you can get this support from the private sector. You can also do some joint advocacy ideas, as well as product or service integration. So these are just a few examples of models of private sector CSO collaboration. There is a social enterprise model, which I even alluded to, which is very, very critical. And this is basically, using commercial or using business ideas or business thought to solve societal problems. So instead of just drilling, for example, instead of just drilling water and giving people a donation, you do the water, but you ask them to pay as they use. Other models which have worked very successfully, even in the cities, is where you pay some little amount of money to use maybe a public toilet. It's a social enterprise. So you are able to pay a small amount in Kenya, 10 shillings, in other countries, maybe $1 or 50 cents, and you're able to use public toilet, and they are able to maintain it. That's an example of a social enterprise model which contributes to the social good. And then it can also include shared research, and even, like now number 10, is the issue of the loans and investments. There are organizations which can also give you loans and investments so that you're able to do things. So we are no longer just going for free things, but are now going to even people giving you kind of like investments. Now, I just want to share a bit about ethical guidelines and operational principles when you are approaching this private sector. And one of the things you need to be careful about on an ethical point of view is which industries do you go to? Will you receive money from each industry, or you will be concerned about some, for example, some which are in the extractive industries, those also producing alcohol? Are they aligned to your mission? Do they ensure that you have got some mutual respect? Do they, promote sustainability in the long run? And, you also have to have very clear guidelines for engagement so that you don't feel used by the private sector. And from the onset, you have to agree on how the collaboration will be communicated, because as I mentioned to you, the private sector, they're looking for branding, they're looking for visibility, but maybe on your side, you don't want that visibility to be put on your branding. So you have to agree on the onset so that you don't have any conflict along the way. And despite of the benefits and the good things which you can get from the private sector, there is also the challenges which will come across. And as I mentioned, I request other people to share even opportunities and challenges that you have come across. And some of the challenges include misalignment of objectives. You can't find an organization which is so much focused about profit, and they are focusing on maybe their goal is maybe to construct classrooms, and they want it to be very visible to the public that they have done these classrooms, or they want to do desks, but their demand may be something else different. Then there's also the issue of limited resources or expertise from one or both parties. This is a big challenge. So you might go to a private sector organization which don't have any experience about dealing with the private sector, with the civil society organizations. So you have to have like a common ground. Where do you reach in the middle? Then the issue of difficulty in measuring and communicating social impact. Sometimes the private sector, they want to see this social impact quickly. And on the other hand, the nonprofit might take time to demonstrate that impact. But of course, there are opportunities which still exist, include leveraging on the cross-sector expertise, engaging in new markets and other opportunities. So I'm also sharing with you now a little bit about a tool you can use. You can adopt this to your situation. Like when you want to do partnership assessment, you can come up with a tool just to help you, like when you're assessing a particular private sector. So you are looking at issues like mission and value assessment, and then you give a score. If they are very much aligned, you can give yourself a score of 5. If there is a little alignment, you give yourself 1. the audience overlap? Are your target community the same? Is there some sort of like a common customers and employees? If there's some sort of alignment, you give it a score. If it is very much aligned, 5, very low alignment, 1, then do they have any existing philanthropic initiatives? What is their corporate reputation? And is there any existing business connections? So these are things that you look like. You can use this partnership assessment scale just when you're going to assess the nonprofits you want to go to. The private sector you want to go to. And then using that information, you make a decision. So this is just an example, but you can use your own criteria for making the final decision. Now, then briefly, this is also just some ideas. If you want to make a pitch to a private sector, whether it is just a 1-page or it's just a 1-page proposal or even a long proposal, you need to, just the same way you're doing it to bilateral donors or even high net worth individuals. But for the private sector, they'll also be looking at some things. How are you bringing the issue of recognition and visibility to them? How are you going to ensure employee engagement? These are some of the unique things which the private sector are looking for. And then there's also the issue of testimonials and success stories. So you have to tell your story, what is the success you are making, so that you're able to, they can associate with you. And then, towards the end of my presentation, so remember, when you're doing your sustainability roadmap, you have to have a very, very good profile. And, when you're investing to different private sector, which you have selected, you have to be very clear what are you pitching to them in terms of what is the change you want to bring about, what is the cost-benefit logic that you're bringing about. And of course, you have to have the transparency and the impact metrics. And you must have a professional board, the issue of trust. And thank you so much, Ruth Mariru, as you are sharing about the study that you did in terms of the issues which affect nonprofits and the issue of trust. There's a study we did last year, but one together with East African Philanthropy Network. And when we're doing the mapping the philanthropy ecosystem, and one of the biggest challenges that nonprofits were facing was the issue of trust and accountability. So if this can be dealt with, you can end up getting a lot of support from the private sector. So there are just a few examples of the key private sector players which you can research at your own time, including Microsoft, which is very big. There's Google, there's Coca-Cola, IKEA, and of course, Safaricom has been very big in Kenya, and they have done a lot of projects. So that's just an example of private sector engaging in the social sector. There is companies, oil companies like Shell, and even MasterCard. These are very big in the sector. So as a conclusion, I just want to share with you that it is very, very important that we acknowledge that both the private sector as well as the nonprofits have got a common goal or dream of driving social transformation. So the opportunity already exists, and therefore we need to harness that advantage. And therefore we also need to establish clear frameworks of collaboration, come up with ethical guidelines, how we are going to collaborate, as well as communicate channels where you are going to be reporting the result of this collaboration. So I just want to challenge you, especially those who have not been used to engaging with the private sector, that take a look around. The private sector is not just the big international organizations in the capital city. It can also include a supermarket in the neighborhood. It can include a wholesale in the neighborhood. Go to them and they might support you. So thank you very, very much. And I'm happy to hear your experiences and even some questions. Thank you very, very much.
On how we can work with the private sector. We welcome questions, we welcome comments, as he's already acknowledged that a lot of you in the audience may have this experience. We are going to transition to the Q&A, and particularly because we don't have much time left, so that at least we hear your questions and your comments. We have one question from Tele Gethenji that we had packed, and I believe either you, Rose, or Morris can actually take a stab at this. The question is, the current development and humanitarian architecture is built fully for traditional aid, money flowing from global north to south. Do you see a dismantling of this architecture or the creation of a totally new one? And I think that has been, the thinking that was actually being advanced by Evans, definitely we need to rethink. But what's your opinion, Maurice and Rose? Rose, you can start as we give Maurice a moment to take a breath.
Yeah, thank you. So before January, was it 24th? Yes, most of us in this sector were calling for dismantling of the current global aid system, right? So that has happened now, right? It hasn't happened. I don't know that it was for us to choose how it happened, but it has happened, and it's painful. It's not the way that we would have preferred that it happens. It was cruel. It's been damaging, but here we are, and I think it's an opportunity to build for us. I mean, I'm not talking about the global, the Northern and what they would do, but I'm thinking about us, for us Africans. I think this is our moment, and this is really our opportunity to really rethink, deeply rethink, Evans and Maurice have alluded to some of that rethinking, and really to make sure at least we're never again dependent on foreign funding for really basic rights, like the right to health and the right to education, that some foreign government is the one that's taking care of African children. You know what I mean? So for me, I see this as an opportunity to rebuild. But we'll have to really rethink also, what do we look like as institutions? Obviously, if we are trying to become the local Save the Children or another INGO, I don't think that's what we're looking at. I think we're really being asked to really rethink even our own models of operating, and to be reminded of why do we exist, really. And I haven't had much in this conversation about why we exist and the people that we exist to serve, and how are they doing. So we are preserving our organizations for what? So I think we really need to also really interrogate our role. Should we be providing services? Is that really our role, or is that the government's role? Yeah, so that's my take on that.
Have something to add, please come through as we welcome other people to put their questions and comments on the chat.
So that is a very, very important question, but also good to understand the way the international, we can call them developed countries are richer than the other countries. And we are now moving from charity to justice. It's not just about charity, but really solving systemic problems. So we are seeing a situation where we're shifting from aid to partnerships, where it is not just the ordinary aid of just from hand to mouth, but co-creation of activities. And Evans really stated very clearly that we will be saying, like, how do we mutual partnerships to solve local problems? And they was also seeing, like, from trade, from aid to trade, where I think blended finance or impact investment. So this is a new way of doing things, like, do you just give people aid, as it were, from all the time, or do you give them like an investment and they work on it? So these are already changes which are taking place across. So, for example, you can remember from UK aid, they used to talk of, it used to be, I think, UK aid, and it has changed on to a new infrastructure. And many of these international organizations they are changing from, it changed from DFID to UK aid, so all these things are changing. There's also greater focus on system change, not just this service delivery. So there's more focus on strengthening public systems or public sector. So if you look at the volume of aid that comes to Africa, for example, even to a country, you realize that these foreign governments, they give almost half of the money to the governments and the other half to the private sector. So they're looking at systemic change. If you change, for example, the health system, it can have far-reaching impact across the whole country instead of just solving these issues at a local level. So we're also looking at other crises which are coming up, like climate and other, like these global crises that are happening, like the wars which are happening. This was definitely going to change the focus of aid There is the issue of focus on accountability, transparency, and anti-corruption. That is a big problem. So, for example, there are some countries which look at the global, the picture, and they see that is a country, a few people owning most of the money, and yet most of the country is poor. So, aside from relying on the money from outside, how can we dismantle some of these monies which are contained within the country in terms of bringing accountability? There's digital transformation which is coming and reducing cost. The organizations such as Give Directly, which tries to give money directly to the recipients and therefore reduce the administrative cost. And part of the reason why you said was dismantled, so they say, was the amount of the go between the money and the end. I don't know how true it is, and Irene, you can comment on it. But there are such organizations like Giving Directly, which is trying to dismantle the go-between by just taking the aid directly to the people. Then there's the locally led philanthropy, and we talked about the South to South philanthropy, which is coming up. This global South collaboration between countries. It is an area which is coming up. So there are many things which are coming, and the opportunities are there. So we cannot just sleep and rely on the aid that used to come from the West, but there are these new forms which are coming. That is how I can respond to the question. Thank you very much.
Insights, and Lily, Terry has already appreciated the insight from Rose, and I believe the addition from Maurice is also very welcome. I know within the audience there are people with experience, people who have worked in the sector, people who have started from the scratch in terms of developing their domestic resources. And I would like to invite a person to unmute and share in the next 2 to 3 minutes their experiences. Is there one person game enough to unmute and share, as we encourage you to put your questions and comments on the chat as we go to wind up the session? Purity Mumo, do we have someone who can share their experiences in domestic resources? You have somebody raising the hand. Unfortunately, I cannot see it. Why is it? Someone is raising the hand. Maybe unmute them and they can speak. Oh, no one has raised. Thank you. Yes, please raise your hand if you'd like to speak as well. Thank you. So at the moment, we don't have anybody raising their hand to speak, and we have covered all the questions. Maybe perhaps one of the things that I've really appreciated and can share is that working with the local development organizations and community-based organizations, we are appreciating that definitely this is a moment to rethink, re-strategize how we work with our communities, and particularly how we are supporting the very needs of the community without the chuckling of course, the aid and the requirement to comply and the requirement to report and the matrices and all the things that have taken up a lot of time of the organization, and appreciating that then with the community that you'll be providing services to, you need to understand the need for reporting, the need to tell the stories, the need to continuously report and share the information with them, because actually that is the source of continued support, even if it means volunteer support and the resources that the community will be able to support in implementing the program. And in so doing, you're continuing to provide services that are critical to the community, and that's how you'll also build trust to work with private sector, to work with government. We haven't talked about working with government, which is a big thing all across the board, that government can also provide services, can also provide resources for you to extend the services they are not able to extend to the community. And most important, for even other non-traditional donors to come and partner, including foundations and private sector. Is there any hand up? Is there additional question? Maybe at the moment is then to appreciate the speakers very much, from Evans, who has left to prepare for the East African Conference, that's happening in Kigali, to Rose Maroro for the insights on individual giving, and to Maurice. Really appreciate the work that you've done. And I see there's an additional question. Okay. Please touch base on Public Benefit Organization Act benefits challenges that might arise while complying. Now, do we have an expert on PBO Act in Kenya in audience who can touch on that? I think that is an important thing to comment on. Anyone in the audience who can be able to share that, to share information on that? Maurice?
Yeah, so to start with, this is the Public Benefit Organization Act is replacing the NGO Act. And one of the purpose of this particular act is to kind of bring, they're calling to bring order to the sector. And there are some requirements. Most of the requirements are like what was there in the NGO Act. And I think by last month, the deadline for registration was supposed to be last month transitioning. Unfortunately, less than 30% of the organizations had transited. So they've been given another 1 year. And what it means, there are some clauses which talk about describing your sources of funding, how you're utilizing the funding. So it's on one hand, it is something which the civil society organizations have been asking for many years, and it has come to pass. And there are others who are skeptic about it. But generally speaking, it is, it streamlines, or it makes it easier for organizations to register in one body. It also makes it easier in terms of reporting and the reporting requirements and the compliance. So the challenge will be, for example, if you're not able to account for your sources of income and how you're utilizing it. So the other time, there were some people wanted to amend it so that they can, demand that they limit the amount of foreign funding that you can get, but it did not pass. So aside from this law being an enabling factor in the Kenya society, in other jurisdictions like Tanzania or even Rwanda, Uganda, etc., there have been laws which have been put in place to support non-profit organizations or public benefit organizations. And some of these have been deemed to be supporting the ecosystem, but then there are also others which are, not supporting the ecosystem. But I'm happy to hear from others. I can see good to hear from others their own experiences. But this particular piece of law, it's available. It is publicly available. The authority has been in place. In December, they spent a lot of time trying to tell the CEOs of many organizations what it entailed. There's another piece of law which we need to be aware of. It is the Charities Act, which was also being discussed. It was still a bill, and some components of it were being seen as harmful to non-profits, but we were able to share our own thoughts, and it is still in Parliament. There's also another piece of bill that we need to be aware of. There's the Fundraising Act, or the Fundraising Bill, which is also still under discussion in Parliament, and this is meant to control or to regulate the whole aspect of resource mobilization, be it from fundraising in Harambee, through WhatsApp, through everything. So I just want to alert you, in case you're not aware of them, to be alert to those ongoing discussions. But I'm happy to hear from other people their own experiences about this particular act. So far, nobody has been penalized. We have been given a grace period for another 1 year, but don't wait for the year before you fall victim. So thank you very much again.
So much, and for also responding to that question on the PBO Act. Again, thank you, Rose, thank you, Maurice, and Evans, and the team for such an insightful conversation about domestic fundraising. We are going to start, and I leave you with this quote. Joshua, please give me a second if you don't, out of your closing. If you know the Nigerian poet, Ijeoma Omebinyua. I think somebody in the West should really correct me on that. He talks about starting, and starting now, starting where you are, starting with fear, starting with pain, start with doubt, start hard shaking, start with voice trembling, start, don't stop, start from where you are with what you have. Just start. Start domestic resource mobilization for sustainability. Thank you. Over to you, Joshua.
Thank you very much. We want to say a big thank you again to our speakers and to our moderator. We've come to the end of this webinar, but please don't leave just yet. We would like to get some feedback from you, and then we'll tell you about the next and the last webinar. So please, many of you know the drill. Let's log into Mentimeter. You log into menti.com, or you can use the QR code that you're going to find on the screen. That will probably be the easiest. So please, let's all log in so that we can get your feedback either to menti.com, or you use the QR code and you'll get, it's only 3 slides so that we can end together. So please, let's all log in. That URL will remain at the top of the slide even when I move. Menti.com, and the use code is there, 3446-2008, or use the QR code. And the first question is if you can share with us your top 3 takeaways from today's webinar. If you're going to put more than one, put one and then submit, and do the same for the second and third. Submit so that we can be able to analyze a lot easier. Yes, please put your 3 takeaways. One of you has indicated start anyway. Individual donations, if you can put a phrase that we can understand, that will be helpful. Local resource mobilization is a takeaway from one of you. Partnership must replace patronage. Start now, start fundraising. Your potential donor could be the next grocery store. Tips for engaging the private sector opportunities for CSOs, please keep them coming. We have a strong local expertise, need for mind shift to individual giving, this opportunity to rethink existing structures. Resilience is not an enduring broken systems. Harness local resources, need to shed the Western lens. Those of you who still haven't logged in, you can do so at menti.com. It's at the top of the slide, and the use code is there. So please join us in doing this bit of feedback. Put exit plans in place early, engage with private sector, strengthen local philanthropy. I need to change my mindset on how funding looks like as shaped by Western donors. We need to rethink our models of development, a future beyond aid. Look at all private sector, not just big corporates, working with community, keep them coming, engaging, and partnering with private sector, looking inwards, be innovative to tap private sector. In every crisis, there's an opportunity. It's a very, very, very good. Let me just use a bit of AI here to analyze and see the categories. So a lot of lessons and takeaways about local fundraising, about the need for mindset shift, about community engagement, about engaging with the private sector, and a need to rethink our models of development. Very Very good. Right. Okay, what should we do to improve the next webinar? We've got one more webinar. We want to make it a grad final, and so we could do with your suggestions of where to improve. So we would really appreciate your feedback here. Additional time for presentations. Needs assessment. Just to mention that actually we had done one at the start of the series. Have more stories from the field, allow for more interactions, expand the reach, try and address all questions, and add more time so as to ensure exhausting of topics. Invite a diverse local fundraisers for experience sharing, having response from the people in the active partnership to mentor the young, add more time for questions. Very good. Keep them coming. Keep them coming. Okay. Sorry. Okay. Got on one more slide, and then we will tell you about our next. Okay. Keep them coming, but let me sort what has come through. There are comments and suggestions about the duration of the session, about interaction, practical examples, and open doors of feedback beyond these sessions. It's very, very helpful. Thank you. This is the last one. Please rate your overall experience out of 10. How do we rate the speakers, interactivity, facilitation, moderation, and were your objectives met? So please let's Okay, let's get a few more response. This is important to us. Right. So far, those who have voted 86% to our speakers. And not surprisingly, thank you very, very much. 87%. Definitely we'll need to do a lot more on interactivity, and we'll try to do that next week. And so now let me share with you information about the session. The last session will be on Thursday, the 29th of May, same time, 4 p.m. to 5:30 p.m. We have two fantastic speakers. Actually, we've got one main speaker, Waithaka Gatumia. He is the CEO of Centonomy Limited. But before he speaks, Irene Karimi, and some of you would know her as a chief of party in a number of programs, will share with us some very, very helpful stories, including her own story of a time she was 2 years between jobs. And so it will be very, very interesting to find out what do you do when you are between jobs and as you wait for the new opportunity. And then Waithaka is going to help us. He's done this many times, and some of you know him from other presentations and webinars, and we are so grateful that he's availed himself to come and help us in this very, very important topic of finding your footing, practical steps to coping with job loss, managing your finances, and rebuilding with resilience. And that brings us to the end of this webinar. Thank you very much. We so much appreciate being with you today. We hope that you've gone home with quite a number of ideas about the next steps. And until Thursday, thanks and bye-bye.